the next environment is about tropical lowlands. And what do we have here? So here we talk about tropical lowlands and post-glacial forests. And the environments for Felipe Hernandez Ernesto has in mind here are the post-glacial and temperate woodlands of in America, the North American temperate forests, and particularly of Europe, and the extensive deforestation of those, which of course has been extraordinarily significant. He has a rather tragically named little section called The Retreat of the Trees from Forests to Cities in 12th century Europe. But he also is talking about tropical lowlands and the environments and cultures that he talks about here are Frederick Hendrick Island, which is now known as Pulau Dolok or Pulau Yosudarso Island, and that is a island that is kind of separated from the main island of New Guinea. It's sort of like halfway down, and on the bottom a little bit to the left there's this sort of island that has like a, almost like a huge river, but I guess it's like an ocean passage that runs between it and the mainland, Frederick Hendrick Island, also, but now known as Pulau Yosudarso. So there you go. I actually had to look that one up. But he also talks about the Olmec heartland in kind of Mexico, I think, kind of Mesoamerica, the low Amazon, the lowland Maya Island lands in sort of South America, the valleys of the Khmer, and of course the Great Angkor Wat, which I was tempted to do. But the place that I'm going to focus on is Benin City in Africa, in what is now Nigeria, kind of on the southern part of Africa that the Kingdom of Benin was in, sort of like that, how Africa is the big part that goes out into the Atlantic Ocean and comes in like a sort of paragraph indent and then comes down again. And the Kingdom of Benin, or the Benin Empire, also known as the Edo Kingdom, was really nestled in the little corner of that indent in central sort of Africa. I don't know if I've described that terribly well, but you can look it up on Wikipedia and you'll see what I mean. And again, just going back to Fernandez Ernesto's theme of overcoming sort of presumptions and negative assumptions about where and how civilizations can, and what sorts of environments civilizations can emerge in. He kind of quotes, Noel Coward of Mad Dogs and Englishmen saying, "In tropical climes there are certain times of day when all the citizens retire to take their clothes off and perspire. It's one of those rules that the wisest fools obey, because the sun is much too sultry and we must avoid his ultraviolet ray. Only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun." But by contrast to that, he quotes the Islamic writer Ibn Khaldun, who lived between 1332 and 1406, and who wrote a famous work called the Muqaddimah, which is a kind of a history, sociology, or brought together. And those of the listeners who have read John Darwin's great book After Tamerlane, which I really probably should do a show on at some point, it begins with the story of Ibn Khaldun being raised in a basket to enter Damascus to meet the soon to die Tamerlan in one of the last great efforts to conquer the whole of Eurasia. But anyhow, Mukadama also would have travelled into Africa as part of his, studies and journeys, and he would probably have encountered the kingdom of Benin, or emissaries or tales of the kingdom of Benin, because it was a kingdom that existed that particularly sort of strengthened from around about 1000 AD and really prospered for quite a few 100 years after that, including the enormous walls of this city that emerged in the tropical lowlands. And Ibn Khaldun says here that the assumption that civilization cannot exist at the equator is contradicted by continuous tradition, and God knows better. So there you go. So it's not just the Western tradition who have reflected on ideas of civilization and how it has adapted the environments around. It is also the Islamic tradition. Anyhow, so let's get back to Benin. To live in the tropical lowlands requires cultivating the swamp, and that swamp can seem to be what Fernandez Amisto says with a bit of a tongue in his cheek as a habitable hell, the place on earth where people live in the most deadly environment with the most malign climate, the most intractable soil, the sickliest air and the foulest water. But there have been peoples who have adapted this environment to their own way of life, including those people in New Guinea or Frederick Hendrick Island, Palau, Upasaro, I think it was, and in Mexico, and in Mesoamerica, and in the Amazon, and perhaps quite extraordinarily so in the Mekong Delta, where the Khmer civilization and the great Angkor Wat developed, but also in the city of Benin. And while Angkor Wat leaves this extraordinary piece of monumental stone building, there is a different kind of city that has survived in Benin. It had been visited by European travellers from the 1600s. There's an engraving or an illustration of the city of Benin by a Dutch engraver in 1668, although it quite likely creates a few adaptations to fit European tastes. So Benin emerged as a city in this part of Africa out of a cluster of smaller communities in the 15th century, so in the 1400s. And it had a hot, humid climate with lots of rainfall. Ultimately, there was a royal palace built there, but it was known that there was 80 inches of rain a year, and 80 inches of rainfall a year. And sometimes there were reports that in the royal palace the rain was coming down so hard no one could actually hear anything of what people were saying. It was quite a it was a place where there was human sacrifice, where there were extraordinary and substantial buildings, largely built from mud, but stamped with beautiful reliefs and ornamental brass plaques. If you like, it was like a mud brick city. And the people of Benin were incredibly artistic, endowed with great resources of metal, and renowned in both their art and also their warfare. They created huge, beautiful brass heads of their kings and queen mothers, and also carved elephant tusks in exquisite ways. Altar rings, spears, shields, swords, all sorts of fabulous furniture. The city was surrounded by a wall made of the same mud and earth, which to some of the initial travellers from Europe didn't seem to be a wall at all, so much as a big ditch, because I guess they were looking for brick or wooden fences, but another traveller said that at the gate where I entered on horseback, I saw a very high bulwark, very thick of earth, with a very deep, broad ditch, but it was dry and full of high trees. That gate is a reasonable good gate, made of wood in their manner, which is to be shut, and there is watch holden. These walls were built somewhere between the first millennium and the mid-15th century, and there's oral traditions that suggest that most likely more around 1400. And it was of quite an extraordinary scale. So the walls of Benin are a series of earthworks made of banks and ditches, and they consist of 15 kilometres and an estimated 16,000 kilometres in the rural area around the main city, and then 16,000 kilometres in the rural areas. So they are extraordinary and almost like in length of the same sort of equivalence as like the Great Wall of China, and complex layout and all sorts of extraordinary things. So again, quite a amazing and hidden achievement. But Benin also became a conquest state with tribute and slaves across its broad area, across that the Niger and the sea, and colonising various areas. And its wealth really came partly from agriculture, partly from its metals and its art, but also very much from commerce. Not slaves so much as the metalworks, the ivory, the carvings. During the 17th century, however, Benin starts to subside in power. There's a bit of a revival in the 1690s, but it ultimately succumbs to European imperialism. So this is this great, remarkable city civilization that in some ways to early Europeans didn't even seem like a city because it was just mud huts, but is quite remarkable in its cultural and civilizational accomplishment. Towards the end of this section, Felipe Hernandez Amesto actually reflects on the fate of these lost civilizations in the jungle, the great, trope of archaeology, of archaeologists going like Indiana Jones or Stanley Livingstone going into the jungle and discovering the lost civilizations. And indeed, that was the experience of some European travellers in the, 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, of going into places like Borobudur or Angkor Wat and Benin, and discovering these lost civilizations in the jungle. It's a bit of an enduring trope, I guess, and can easily lead one to think that a civilization is unlikely to have a successful fate in the tropical lowlands, but that is not really the case. So Fernandez Amesto says every civilization or proto-civilization in tropical lowlands has been stifled in immaturity or declined from grandeur. Their monuments have been choked by jungle or sunk into swamp. Although some lowlands in the tropics provide abundant means of life, in most the balance of the environment is precarious and civilization is fragile. Yet almost every civilization, in almost every environment, has ultimately been reconquered by nature and reduced to ruins.